Okay, unit 8 less than, or unit 9 less than 8 when dividing is also the same as multiplying. So we're going to take some whole numbers and divide those by another whole number to produce a fraction. But we're also going to talk about dividing a whole number by a unit fraction, which is the same as taking that whole number times the denominator. So then the way that we can write that is like this equation over here, 1 over d times w, dividing by a unit fraction. So SAB page 385 to 388. Okay, so if there were 4 people, I have an extra waffle here, guys. Let me get rid of that. If there are 4 people in the Walton family, but there are only 3 waffles, how can the Waltons share the waffles equally? Well, you would divide each waffle up into fourths, just like this picture shows. And then each person's share of one individual waffle is 1/4. Since there are 3 waffles, each person gets 3 of the fourths, right? So each individual person is going to get 1 piece. So one kiddo gets this, this, and this, right? So what if we had 5 people and 4 waffles? Well, let's start with what each person's share of 1 waffle would be. If there was only 1 waffle and 5 people, you'd get 1/5 of the waffle, right? That kind of makes sense. You can't have the whole entire thing. You can only have 1/5 of it. So then if there are 4 waffles, what's a person's share? Well, they would get 4/5 because they'd get 1/5 out of each individual waffle, right? And if there are 4 waffles, they'd end up with 4/5. Okay, so 4 divided by 5 is the same thing as 1/5, or 4 times 1/5, right? 4 times 1/5, which is the 4/5. Okay, so suppose there are 10 people and 7 waffles. What's each person's share of 1 waffle? So if you only had 1 waffle, right, and you had to share it between 10 people, you'd each get 1/10 of the waffle. So if there are 7 people, or there's 7 waffles and 10 people, you would get 7/10 of a waffle. So 7 divided by 10 is the same thing as saying 7 times 1/10, which is 7/10. Okay, so let's take a look at some more of these. 5 divided by 6 is the same thing as 5 times 1/6. So then that would be 5/6. It's just turning it into a fraction, really, guys. If you notice, when you divide, right, it's the same thing as making fractions. So 4 times 1/9, or 4/9. Okay, well, so to divide 7 waffles equally among 8 people, you would take 7 divided by 8. And then when you do that, right, you know that you're doing the same thing as 7 times 1/8. So 7 times 1/8 then is 7/8. So they would each get 7/8 of a waffle. So how can 39 waffles be divided equally among 5 plates? Well, 39 divided by 5. Okay, so 39 divided by 5 is the same thing as saying 39 times 1/5, or 39/5. And then because that's an improper fraction, you would want to make it a mixed number. So thinking about how many times can 5 go into 39? No, it can go in there 7 times. You can pull 7 5s out of 39. So you'd have 7, and then what's left over is 4/5. So everybody would get 7 waffles and 4/5 of a waffle on the plates. Okay. When you look at these equations, n divided by d is the same thing as n times 1 over d, which is n over d, because when we divide, it's the same thing as a fraction. A fraction is just another way of saying division, so don't get confused by that. Okay? All right, so let's try a couple more problems here. How many eighths are there in one whole? Well, there would be 8 eighths in one whole, right? Because 1 divided by 1/8 is 8 eighths, right? So if I counted out these eighths, there would be 8 eighths. So how many eighths are there in 3 whole? Again, you could count out each of these, but it's 24 because 8 times 3 equals 24. But if it wants a division one, you would say 3 divided by 1/8. 3 divided by 1/8. Right, there's my division problem. Okay. Why can you also use the multiplication equation 3 times 8 to show 24, to show how many eighths there are? Dividing by a unit denominator is the same as multiplying by the denominator. So that was what I said at the very beginning there. Anytime you are dividing by a unit denominator, it's the same as multiplying the whole number times the denominator. So how many fourths are there in 5? 20. Right? And if you were going to do a division problem, you would say 5 divided by 1/4. And if you were going to do a multiplication problem, you would say 5 times 4, right? Okay, one more. Olivia made 9 sandwiches and cut each one into fourths. How many fourths does she have? You can see my 9 sandwiches over here. You guys could draw those out and finish cutting those up. But really all you're doing is 9 divided by 1/3, or 1/4, sorry, or 9 times 1/4, or 9 times 4, which is 36. So if you counted those out, she has 36 fourths. Okay? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and actually go forward onto the next page. Karen's 5 grandchildren came to visit for 3 days. Karen found a long roll of drawing paper. She said, I'll cut this paper into 3 equal parts and we'll use 1 part per day. She cut the first part into 5 equal parts so each grandchild could make a drawing. She asked her grandchildren, what part of a whole paper do you have? What's the math problem is this? So we're making a drawing over here and we've got 1/3. Right? It's today she cut it into 1/3, and then she took 1/3 and cut it up into 5 equal parts. So then you can take those 5 equal parts and go, okay, well, if we cut 1/3 into 5 equal parts, we found 1/3 divided by 5, the fraction of the whole number. Okay? But we have to divide the other 2/3 into equal parts to find out how many there are in all. Right? So one little individual piece, right? If there's 5/3 here, there's 5/3 here, and there's 5/5 here, here, and here, right? So one of those little chunks, the whole, is 15. So it's 1/15. Okay? So Sammy, the youngest child, said, so dividing by 5 is the same as multiplying by 1/5 because you're finding equal parts. Okay? The whole concept here is the whole number is the same as multiplying by 1 over the whole. So if you look at this here, I can take 1 over the denominator, divide it by the whole number, is the same thing as saying 1 over the denominator times 1 over the whole number, which gives me a whole denominator there, the entire units. Okay? So let's see if we can kind of apply this concept, and hopefully that'll help it make better sense. If I take a half and I divide it by 3, it's the same thing as saying 1/2 times 1/3. Okay? And then you know when you're multiplying, you just multiply straight across. So it would be like saying 1/6. Okay, so taking a fifth and cutting it up into 2 pieces, right, is like saying 1/5 times a half, which is 1/10. And that should hopefully kind of make sense because 10 is 5 is half of 10. So if I cut it in half, I'm going to end up with a 1/10. Okay, reread over that if that didn't make sense. Let's go over a few others. These are the patterns that you're going to see here. The numerator divided by the denominator is the same thing as saying the numerator times 1 over the denominator, which is the same thing as saying n over d. Okay? A whole number divided by a unit fraction is the same thing as saying the whole number times the denominator. Okay? A unit fraction divided by a whole number is the same thing as saying the unit fraction times 1 over that whole number. Okay, so let's describe some patterns that we're seeing here. Dividing a whole number is the same as multiplying by a unit fraction. You guys can read this on your own. A unit fraction with a whole number in the denominator and dividing a unit fraction is the same as multiplying by the denominator of the unit fraction. Why is dividing a whole number the same as multiplying by a unit fraction? Because the whole number can be making equal parts. Okay, so names one of the equal parts. Why does dividing the unit fraction make w times the whole number times the denominator a larger number? Because you're finding out how many of those smaller fractions are in that whole number. So how many parts are there in a whole? Okay, let's apply this information some. If you guys need to pause to go back and get any of that previous, make sure you do so. Okay, so 3 divided by 7 is the same thing as saying 3 times 1/7. Or 3/7. Okay. 5 divided by 8 is 5 times 1/8 or 5/8 total. Okay. 4 divided by 1/3 is the same thing as saying 4 times 3, which is 12. 7 divided in half is the same thing as saying 7 times 2, which is 14. Okay. Half divided by 5 is the same thing as saying half times 1/5. Okay, it's just a little inverse operation. Times 1/5, so it's 1/10. Okay. 1/3 divided by 4 is the same thing as saying 1/3 times 1/4. Which is 1/12. Okay. We'll come back to this tomorrow. I want you guys to go ahead and go on to that bottom question, question 28 down here, and I want you to answer it so that you're understanding it, okay? Make sure you explain the 3 expressions, which one's the greatest, which one's the least, and which one's in between.